Hi guys, Spink here. This is episode 7 of Hardercore with kOS. In this episode, we are going to try to fulfill the Kerbin powered landing contract. And what that requires is that we land within 40 meters of the black monolith that's about 2 kilometers north of the KSC. We have to achieve an altitude of 500 meters in the interim. And we cannot use any parachutes, nose cones, air-breathing engines, wings, anything like that. So I guess we should build a lander. This is what I've come up with. It's pretty lightweight and has enough power to get us what we need to do. I built little RCS thruster modules since I don't have them yet, so I built a little 5-way thruster here and put 5 gimbaling engines on the bottom. These are the Spider engines, and we still have the Staputnik on top. It has no RCS or SAS, but that isn't anything we really need anyway, because we do have our RCS for attitude control. It's got plenty of legs, probably more legs than it needs, but I'm calling this the KSC Spider. All right, so let's take a look at the script. I've mentioned in passing PID loops before, but I haven't really talked about them. And I'm not going to get into a great deal of detail now because there's much better resources than me for doing this. So I'm going to put a link up to Kevin Geese's PID loop videos on his Kerbal Space Programming series, which is awesome, and everybody should go watch it. So I'm just going to say a little bit about it. It's really 3 controllers in one. There's a proportional component, an integral component, and a derivative component. The proportional component is the amount of error, and it's very similar to how I was doing the set throttle command previously. The integral component is the cumulative error over time, and the derivative component is the error change rate. And we can set how much effect each of these components will have. It's like having, say, a bass, mid, and treble controller on a stereo. You can independently set those to say how much of which you're going to do on there. What I've got it set to is 0.1 on the proportional and 0.05 on the integral and derivative. So the integral and derivative are going to have half the effect that the proportion has. So what we're going to do, we've got this countdown script that I just copied over from the Ascent. I'm doing things a little different in this one. Instead of using the phases to run library scripts, I'm pretty much running this kind of like how Ascent is, for instance. So phase is going to kind of act a lot more like run mode in this than in the prior scripts. So we're going to have a 10-second countdown. We're going to take off. We're going to set our PID point to 10. In this case, it's going to be compared against our vertical speed. That's going to be our proportional component, 10 versus our vertical speed. So that's what we're after. After we get above 10 meters, I'm going to pull up the landing gear and go to phase 3. Phase 2 here, we're going to be going straight up. Eventually, we're going to want to head north to get to that monolith, but we don't really want to do that too soon. So that's what that's all about. Phase 3, we're going to be in until we reach our target altitude. In this case, that is 500 meters. Until that time, we're going to keep our PID point at 10 meters per second and use our same heading that we've used before to set H work. We're going to set T work to our PID controller, and this is against our vertical speed that we're going to try to keep that at 10. Once we reach our vertical or our altitude target, we are going to move into phase 4. We're going to set a countdown timer to 30 and set the PID point to 0. So what I'm going to try to do there is for 30 seconds, hover at 0 speed. After that, we're going to reset the PID controller, which we also did up here. What that does is clears out the integral component, which is the change or the error over time when we go into a different phase for controlling that. We don't want to have that remnant left behind. So we'll pop down to phase 5, which is the descent, and we are going to control the descent based on how high we are. We're going to start falling fairly rapidly, but then slow it down the closer we get to the ground. If we try to slow down too soon, say if we went at 5 meters per second all the way down, we'd run out of fuel and then plummet to the ground. If we slow down too slow, then we plummet to the ground. So that's kind of this has kind of been a trial and error that I've figured out as I've gone. So let's take a look at how this all works. There is our countdown. Now I've displayed the P and the I and the D factor here, so you can see by the quantity there how big of effect those are having, and then the times here is what our settings are. And initially they're all pretty good, they're all pretty high until we start getting that dialed in, and then the proportional and the derivative start moving away to nothing, and the integral is still keeping track of the error over time, so it's going to take a lot longer to go down. So here we are coming up on 400 meters, and we are going to begin to hover at 500. So watch these change as we flip over into our new. You see the proportion is pretty high. All right, so we're hovering, and our speed is more or less 0. We're down to 20-30 millimeters per second, so that's pretty much 0. Hopefully I did this right so we don't run out of fuel and crash. Phase 5, this is our descent. So we're coming down at 20 meters per second. And I have an error percentage off to the side here so we can see how far different we are. Now we're going to drop down to 10. You can see that was quite high until it got down. Now we're down to 5. And we land. So not too shabby. So how do we get over there? Well, we've got to do our same ascent, but instead of just going straight up, we have to have a horizontal component to it. So we'll do that by, instead of pitching at 90 degrees, I'm going to pitch over at 80, 85, what have you. Now the faster or the farther we pitch down, the quicker we're going to get over there. But that's also going to give us a horizontal speed that we're going to have to get rid of before we can land, before we can begin our descent. So it's kind of a trade-off, how quick we get over versus how much of this vertical speed or horizontal speed we can bleed off. All right, so let's recover this guy. Whoops. And try for the monolith. All right, so we want to go towards the monolith, so we need a heading to it. And for that, I am using a new function that I found on GitHub. Let's bring it up here. This is a library that individual, looks like TDW89, has made and made available to folks. And it is a bunch of functions for dealing with circles and latitudes and longitudes and things like that. So we can have a bearing in a circle. So we put in two latitudes and two coordinates of two locations, and it will return a bearing to get from one to the other. We have one called Circle Destination, which says if I'm at this point and I head in this direction for this distance around this body, that's where I'm going to end up. Next, Circle Distance. This is one we're definitely going to use. It says between two locations and a given radius, how far away is it? And the last one is Circle Midpoint, which gives you the midpoint between two locations. That's not something that I'm going to be using at this point. So we have, instead of locking our heading to 0 or whatever. Now, how I had done this before is just through trial and error. I would run launch after launch after launch and tweak this heading until I got it exactly, you know, to whatever tenths or hundredths of a degree I needed to do to get it to where I needed to go. So I figured, let's do it a little more elegantly than that. So we're using this circle heading, circle bearing. So we have the ship position and the target position. Target position is the latitude and longitude of the monolith that I found on the Kerbal Space Program wiki. And we're locking our ship position to ship geoposition, and this is your longitude and latitude on the over the body you happen to be above. So by putting in these two locations, we're locking the heading to that. So no matter how off we get, we're always going to be steering back towards it. We're also using, instead of just altitude, ship altitude, I'm going to use the radar altitude, and instead of being the meters above sea level, which is our normal altimeter, this is meters above ground level. So we're going to need that for when we're landing. We want something a little more accurate. So this is just the same. We're going to take off, but now we're going to be heading in a particular direction. Now when we get to within 100 meters of our target, and again, now we're using our new circle distance function. We're using the target position, the ship position, and the ship body radius. That's whichever one we happen to be in the influence of, so that's going to be Kerbin. We're going to reset our PED and go to 4. Other than that, we're still going to do our regular thing. Now, phase 4, we have to kill our horizontal speed. So what I'm going to do is, until our horizontal speed is 0, we're going to lock our heading or set our heading to descent vector. And that is another new function. This is in control. This is, I believe this comes from Kevin Gissy's stuff. Probably just a direct copy of that. And what it does, it's vector angle. So we're going to return an angle between the vector component of surface retrograde and the vector component of up. If that is greater than 90, we're going to do this other function here, unrotate, which I believe that normalizes it to which direction whether you're upside down or not. I think that's what it does. I don't remember exactly. But the gist of it is we're going to aim in such a way that we're going to kill our horizontal velocity. So that's what that does. And once our horizontal speed is less than 1, we'll go just into our landing script like before. This is just a guesstimate right now that it's going to take 100 meters to zero out our horizontal velocity. So that's what we're going to go with. I'm sure that's going to need adjusted. Let's see if we can get within. See if we can get within 100 meters of this thing, or 40 meters rather. Well, that's our most complex. It's going to continue to be our most complex until we build one with more parts than this. All right, so we need to get at least, what do we have, a RCS failure? It's not horrible. we need to get at least 500 meters out of this before we begin our descent. So hopefully we'll get 500 before we get there. Now, yeah, I think that's going to be easily done. We're only about halfway there. Oh, what do we have? A gimbal engine, a gimbal failure. Well, I'm going to need to see what I can do to improve the reliability of these parts, especially before I go off doing something that I can't just recover from easily. All right, phase 4, we're going to kill the horizontal velocity using the RCS to position us. And then we're coming down. We're using that descent vector also just to, as we're coming down. So it looks like we've overshot by about 100 meters. But landing well. All right. Well, that's not too bad for a first attempt. 100 meters away exactly. So what if we change this to 200? And recover that, and we'll try it again. Okay, so I had a bit of a think here, and rather than just shotgunning it until I get that distance correct for bleeding off the speed, I've got two things I changed. One, I'm just going to stick it to ground speed times 4 rather than a hard-coded value in there, just so that it's kind of more adaptable to whatever's going on, whatever our speed happens to be. And I might have to tweak that. And secondly, I've added a new phase 5 here. Moved landing down to say stage 6, phase 6. And if I'm still outside of 10 meters from the target, I'm going to revert back to just steering like we were before. And then when that gets below 10, we drop into landing. Or if the radar altimeter says we're under 300 feet, we just give up and go down at that point. So we'll see how that works out. All right, getting close here. Going to be burning off the horizontal velocity. Oh, that's much better. Anyway, we dropped right into phase 6, which is the landing. But kind of dropped back out of the distance anyway. Well, so didn't really get a chance to test that other functionality. I guess I'll just do that offline because we are within 40 meters, so we should get the contract fulfilled. You are earning Black Monolith. And there we go. Contract complete for 5 reputation and 2 science. Alrighty. So I thought it might be fun to see if we can land at the island airfield. So I stuck a booster at the bottom of this thing, and in place of the phase 1 that I was using before, I'm going to use just the regular ascent script that we've seen in all our other missions. We've locked the heading again to the coordinates that we're after, which in this case is the island airfield back there. And what I'm trying to do is get as close as I can with this booster, and then at that point jettison it and land safely with the lander. Okay, the horizontal speed, or the vertical speed, is decreasing rapidly, so we're starting to nose down. As soon as this hits -50, we'll trigger the abort sequence, and then we'll jettison this booster and see how close we've got. Parachutes to pull it out of the way, just basically pulls it apart. Oh yeah, this is pretty good. So we're nice and close here. And after we burn off the horizontal speed, it's going to do a correction to see if I can get closer to the target than we currently are. Now the downside to that is every bit of fuel that I use for that correction is fuel that I'm not going to have for landing. So it's kind of a trade-off. Let's see. So here we are now, coming back towards the target. And killing the horizontal speed again, more or less. We're down to 2, 1. Well, we're within 50. And now we just free fall. Because we don't have the fuel. Oh, this is going to be close, 380. See if we can... We've got a lot of velocity that we're going to need to kill. I believe at about 1500 is when the engines kick back on. Yep. All right. There's our booster crashing to the ground, or what's remains of it. Oh, we're going to land on the side of the hill. Oh, gosh. And we're going to run out of fuel before we hit ground. Oh, 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 oh. But we are upright, and we're going to do some science. Okay. Yeah. Well, I suppose we could call that a success. We are here. What's this? World's first milestones. We have discovered an abandoned airfield. So, hey, I'm going to call that a success. Recover. All right. So now we have a script that I'll turn that into a library function that can land us at a specific point, which I think will serve us quite well when we're trying to land at different places on the moon, for instance. Next, I think we need to get the communications array. Let's take a look here. SETI contracts, moon flyby manned. Yeah, we can't really, well, we can, but I think the thing to do next is we're going to do a 4-satellite array. Each of them have to be connected to the one 90 degrees on either side of them in a very specific orbit here. Inclination below 1, eccentricity below 0.004 with the periapsis above 248K. Now the first one is going to be pretty straightforward. It just has to get it up to that that orbit at whatever apoapsis that we need to have. But each one after that is going to be offset 90 degrees from the other ones. So we have to do that via scripting. We have to get that 90 degree offset, and we also have to have each of these satellites be as close to identical in orbital period as possible, because otherwise over time they will drift out of alignment and lose connection. So that is what we've got going for next time, I think. I do need to do some science first to pick up some more parts that I'm going to need. So for instance, I need the photovoltaic panels from this one, maybe this battery. So yeah, I'll get a little better stuff with there. Now I could get this reentry pod, the small reentry module here, and do some beginning manned missions, and that would open up some more contracts. Here's some better RCS. Up here we got more fuel tanks. We got our struts coming in. different decouplers. We also have the docking port. Docking port is available at this point, so it might be fun to put a small module up in orbit that's just got a docking port on it, and then use the scripting to rendezvous with it and dock to it with an unmanned probe. That could be fun. Also, we got some more engines up here. So I'll do some science stuff, and next episode we will put up the communications array. So thanks for watching. See you next time.